Imagine being humiliated in front of everyone, forced to scrub the floor like a criminal, simply because of the color of your skin. That's exactly what happened to one black man when two racist cops decided to take things too far. With no regard for his dignity, they made him clean the station's floor as a punishment. But what they didn't know was that this wasn't just any ordinary man. In an unbelievable twist, he was the son of the very police chief they answer to. They had no clue who he really was. What happens next is a shocking revelation that turns everything upside down. The story is about to take a wild turn, one that'll have you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, justice, and respect. Stay tuned for the shocking fallout in the next part of this incredible story. The man, whose name was Marcus, had always kept a low profile in town. He lived a quiet life, rarely stepping into the spotlight. But his father, Chief Carter, was a respected figure in the police department, known for his tough stance on corruption. Marcus had always admired his father from a distance, though he never liked the idea of using his name to get ahead. That day, as he was forced onto his hands and knees, the sting of humiliation was all too real. He wanted to fight back, but he knew that wouldn't help anyone. What Marcus didn't expect was the sense of helplessness that began to rise in him. Anger, frustration, and the unfairness of it all mixed together. He couldn't understand how people, sworn to serve and protect, could behave this way. But in his silence, he wondered, what was really going on behind closed doors as Marcus continued to scrub the floor. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. The officers who had forced him into this degrading position, Officer Daniels and Officer Carter, no relation, seemed oblivious to the growing tension in the room. Daniels was always a bit of a bully, throwing his weight around whenever he could. But Carter, who'd recently been promoted, had a chip on his shoulder, eager to prove himself by showing how tough he could be. Marcus couldn't help but notice the way the other officers watched, some avoiding eye contact, others trying to suppress a smirk. The silence in the room was thick with uncomfortable energy. It was clear that something wasn't right, but Marcus couldn't quite put his finger on it. Were they just following orders? Or was there a deeper issue of racism in their ranks? As the minutes dragged on, his mind raced. What would happen when his father found out? Would the truth finally come out, or would he, too, look the other way? Just like so many others in the department, Marcus could feel the anger simmering in his chest, but he kept his head down, not wanting to draw attention. The sting of injustice was sharp, but he knew he had to stay calm. His mind kept racing. What was his father going to say when he found out what had happened? He had to believe that his father, Chief Carter, would never stand for this kind of treatment. But even as Marcus tried to hold on to that hope, doubt crept in. The department had always seemed so insulated, so full of secrecy. Was his father really as principled as Marcus thought, or had the power of the badge clouded his judgment? Just as Marcus finished his task, the door to the station swung open. In walked Officer Daniels with a smug look on his face, but he didn't know what was coming. Without warning, Marcus stood up and faced him, every ounce of frustration in his body boiling over. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice calm but firm. "You don't know who I am, do you?" His words hung in the air, a challenge in their tone. Daniels froze, his smugness faltering for just a second. But it was enough. For the first time, Marcus saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. But the tension was far from over. All Marcus could think about was what would happen next. Would the truth come crashing down? Or would this moment slip away unnoticed, just another unspoken injustice in the world? His heart raced as he waited for the answer. Just as Daniels was about to respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind Marcus. The door to the station opened again, But this time it wasn't another officer. It was Chief Carter himself. His presence instantly shifted the atmosphere in the room, and every pair of eyes turned toward him. Marcus felt a rush of relief mixed with fear. His father had arrived, and surely he'd put an end to this madness. But as Marcus looked at his father's face, something felt off. The chief's stern expression was unshaken, and his eyes flickered only momentarily toward Marcus before he locked eyes with Daniels. "I hope everything's going smoothly here," Chief Carter said coolly, his tone businesslike as he glanced around the room. No mention of Marcus, no acknowledgement of the situation. The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus' heart pounded in his chest, and his thoughts started to spiral. Was his father turning a blind eye to what had just happened? Did he already know? Was he complicit in the actions of these officers? For a brief moment, Daniel seemed to regain his confidence, and he stepped forward. As if to explain himself, but Chief Carter cut him off with a sharp glance. Then, without missing a beat, he addressed Marcus for the first time. "Get back to work, son," his voice cold, almost dismissive. Marcus stood frozen, his entire body trembling. Was this really happening? The man he had looked up to, his own father, had just sided with the very officers who humiliated him. It felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. A pit formed in his stomach as the realization hit him. This wasn't just about a couple of racist officers. This was about a system, a world where the badge didn't represent justice, but power, loyalty, and corruption. And now Marcus was stuck in the middle, questioning everything he thought he knew about his family, his father, and the truth. Marcus could feel the sting of his father's words deep in his chest, but something inside him snapped. He had spent his whole life trying to prove he wasn't just the chief's son, that he could stand on his own. But now it seemed like everything he believed about his family, about the justice his father had sworn to uphold, was a lie. For a split second, his world came crashing down. He had to make a choice: stay silent and let it all slide, or confront the truth. He couldn't stand the idea of living in a world where silence meant complicity. With a steady breath, Marcus turned to his father. "You're going to let them get away with this?" he asked, his voice trembling but fierce. The chief's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. "Marcus, you don't know what you're talking about. This is bigger than you think." The words felt like a slap. His father wasn't just part of the system, he was the system. But just as Marcus was about to walk away in disbelief, Daniels made a mistake. He laughed, trying to cover up the tension in the room, but his grin faltered when the door behind them opened once more. This time, it was a reporter. A local news anchor, accompanied by a camera crew. Word had gotten out. The moment they saw the camera, Chief Carter's expression shifted, and for the first time, his carefully constructed mask slipped. The room went silent as the news anchor began speaking, her voice calm but cutting through the tension. "We've just received an anonymous tip about the misconduct happening inside this police station," she announced, her eyes scanning the room before landing on Daniels and Carter. "It seems the public is beginning to take notice of what's really going on behind these walls." Marcus stood frozen, his mind racing. The unexpected arrival of the reporter changed everything. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about bringing the truth to light. But just as the chief's hand clenched into a fist, preparing to silence everything, a second figure stepped into the doorway. It was another officer, one who had been silent throughout the ordeal. But this time he wasn't keeping quiet. "Chief, I can't do this anymore," the officer said, his voice shaky but firm. "It's time we expose what's been happening here to everyone." The room fell silent again. Marcus' breath caught in his throat as the officer continued. "I've seen things and I won't keep covering them up." And in that moment, everything changed. The carefully constructed facade of power and authority that had been upheld for so long began to crumble. What Marcus hadn't realized was that this had never just been his fight. It was the fight of everyone who had suffered in silence for far too long, and now they were no longer willing to stay quiet. The chief's face turned pale. He had lost control. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt a sense of power, not from the badge or the badge's connections, but from the truth that was finally coming to light. The tension in the room was palpable as the officer's words echoed. Chief Carter stood there, speechless as the reporter's camera rolled, capturing every second. The truth had come to light, and there was no going back. The corruption, the racism, the abuse of power, it was all exposed. In the days that followed, the department was rocked by investigations, and Daniels and Carter were both removed from their positions.